Hi, good evening. From 1974 to 2002, I was a follower of Sri Chinmoy. It sounds like the start of an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. You go up and you make your confessions at the very start. But what I want to do is I want to give this talk that's based on my memories and reflections of that period of 27 years when I was a devotee, or we called ourselves disciples of Sri Chinmoy. As well as my own memories and reflections, I've looked at more than 100 testimonies by people who were disciples and who have left. So this presentation is informed by that as well. And it's my personal understanding of how the group developed and how it changed from a benign meditation group into a high control group that is sometimes called a cult. It's not a definitive description of the group, and someone else talking about their memories and reflections would probably give a totally different story, but it's how I saw it. So the talk's divided into 3 sections. In the first one, I talk about how I got involved in this and the early years up until the time I was initiated into the group. The second part, I look at what drove the group, the things that were causing the group to go in a particular way. And in the third section, I cover what I discovered after I left the group. So let's see if this works. The story starts in 1970. Us baby boomers, before you were born, and maybe even before your parents were born, us baby boomers who were born after the war were driving changes in this country. So 1960s was the era of sex, drugs, rock and roll. But when the 70s came, some of the leading lights of the 60s turned to various forms of spirituality. So you got Bob Dylan, became a Christian, Cat Stevens got involved in Islam, and the Beatles famously got involved with the Maharishi Yogi. So alternative religion was beginning to get cool, and you had some people coming from the East with their brand of religion and giving it to us Westerners, us baby boomers. Now, the story takes place in Glasgow. It starts in Glasgow, where I was in Glasgow at the time, and my sister and her husband were at Glasgow University. My brother-in-law, Tom, he was a writer and a musician, and he was studying for an English degree, and he was also running the Student Literary Society. And he was contacted by someone called John McLaughlin, who was based in New York. And he was asked if he would put on an event, a lecture by Sri Chinmoy, who was coming to Britain, and he was going around universities giving lectures about his brand of spirituality. Now, my brother-in-law realised that John McLaughlin, the John McLaughlin who had contacted him, was actually a famous musician. Mahavishnu, he was also known as Mahavishnu. He had a big band called the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And he was an avant-garde guitarist. Have any of you heard of him? You have? Yeah, of course. But he was very big in the 60s and 70s. And my brother-in-law was a fan of his. And here, out of the blue, this great musician was contacting him, asking him to put on this event. So, of course, he was delighted to do it. So the event went ahead. Now, at this time, I just knew it was happening. I wasn't involved. In fact, I was just on the point of giving birth to my daughter. So this was just happening along the side, and I didn't pay too much attention to it. So we moved forward 4 years to 1974. Sri Chinmoy was coming to Glasgow again. He was going to give a lecture at Glasgow University, and he was also holding an event for friends and family of people who had joined a Sri Chinmoy Meditation Centre. The first time he came, he opened a Sri Chinmoy Meditation Centre run by my sister and her husband. So my friend wanted to go to this family event, so we went along together. And what happened was the Glasgow disciples put on a play, and when the play finished, Sri Chinmoy meditated. He stood in the middle of the room and he goes like this. Oh. And I was actually very touched by it. There was a real peace in the room when he meditated. And it was really, I had never experienced anything like it before. It was really, really moving. And then when he was leaving, he was going into his car, and he turned round to wave bye-bye to us all. And there were maybe a group of 30, 40 people there. And he looked directly at me. I was kind of singled out, and he looked directly at me, and he gave me this big smile. And again, that really touched me, because, well, it was quite flattering. And, there's a lot of people there, and I was singled out for this particular smile. So that was very nice. So my friend and I then started going to the beginners classes, the meditation classes. And that was fine, and my friend decided she wanted to join. But I wasn't too sure, because there were some rules involved with joining. No drink, no cigarettes, no drugs, vegetarian food. I could cope with them, that was okay. But there was another rule, celibacy. And I wasn't too sure about that at all. I had been married, my marriage by this time had broken up, but I was living with my boyfriend. So I didn't know how he would take the celibacy rule. But anyway, I wasn't sure about it, but eventually I was told either you have to join the group, and if you're not going to join the group, then you have to stop coming to the beginners classes. We can't just keep putting them on just for your benefit. So I was quite distressed about this, and then that night I had a dream. I had a dream of Sri Chinmoy, and Sri Chinmoy was telling me, everything's fine, everything will be fine. And I woke up in the middle of the night, sitting bolt upright in my bed, and I took it as a kind of a sign. The big smile he had given me, and now this dream about him, I took it as a sign that I was meant to be on this path. I was meant to be a student of Sri Chinmoy. Now, the idea that things are meant to be is quite common in Eastern philosophy. Sri Chinmoy said about it, if we're absolutely sincere in our life of aspiration, then we're bound to come into contact with a true spiritual master who can help us and guide us towards our realization. And I believe this has happened to me. So I wrote him a letter. I said I'd like to become his disciple, and he accepted me. So now I was in the centre. And I have to say that those first few years in the centre, I was very happy. A lot of good things were happening there. We were having meditation every day, individually, and then twice a week we'd meet up and we'd meditate together. We were encouraged to take part in sports, so I was going out running every day. I was eating vegetarian food, no drink, no cigarettes or anything, so I was getting really healthy. I was travelling all over the place. I was going to New York every year, and I was going to Europe on trips to Europe. And then we were having constant challenges as well. We were asked to do things that we'd never dream of doing, and we were taking them on. So life was really stimulating, and it was really lovely. And there was a great community as well. Everyone liked each other, and we were all working together. And there were even some stars in our midst. The biggest star that we had at that time was Carlos Santana, and he was a member of our San Francisco group. So it was very nice. You'd go to New York and you'd just be milling around, and suddenly you're bumping into Carlos Santana. So you felt you were important. What did we believe? It was based, some people have described what we believed as Hinduism light. We believed that every person has a soul, and this soul is like a spark of divinity inside each person. And the purpose of life is to bring this divinity to the fore and to manifest it. And reincarnation, we believed in reincarnation, and the purpose of reincarnation was the journey of your soul. So after you die, your soul would take a new body, and it would get another opportunity to manifest the highest. And this would go on and on and on through different incarnations until you reached the stage where your soul was fully manifested, your own inner divinity was fully manifested, and that was called God realization. Now, we believed that Sri Chinmoy had reached that state. He was God realized, and he was teaching us how to get to that state. And to have a truly God realized master was a tremendous privilege. So we felt really honored, and that this was something very special. In fact, a lot of us believed more than that. We didn't just believe that he was a God realized soul. The way Christians might believe that Jesus is God on earth, a divine incarnation, we believe that Sri Chinmoy was also a divine incarnation. So this was tremendously inspiring. With that tremendous status, we also believed that he had great powers, that he had occult vision. And he encouraged us to believe this. Again, another quote from him. He said once, "This guru has an occult vision, and it is very, very effective. It works even more powerfully than a king's army." So we believed he could do things like he could read our mind. He always knew what we were thinking. We believed he was able to cure people. If people were sick and we let him know and they got better, it would be because he had intervened and made them better. So these are the kind of powers that we attributed to him. After 3 years, I was initiated. Now, initiation is a process that you get in a lot of these Indian paths. And again, I'm going to stop all this writing in a minute, but I'm just wanting to set the background here. So he said, the moment I accept someone, I initiate that person with my eyes, or with my hand, or with my smile. At that time, I make an immediate promise to the disciple that I will make him realize the highest. And the student makes a promise that when he realizes the highest, he will become my perfect instrument to manifest the supreme in me. So it was a really important time when you were initiated. And the form it took in our centre was you were given an Indian name, a special Indian name. So this is me getting my name. And I was given the name Tiasha, which means inner thirst for the supreme. So from then on, I was known in that circle as Tiasha. So that is the first part of the story. I was very happy. I had got a guru. I was leading a very nice life. I had lots of nice friends. We were doing lots of good things, and it was great. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about what was driving the centre. His teachings were that you make progress through love, devotion, and surrender. Surrender to the highest part of yourself. And that was fine. That was for a few years. And then he introduced another thing, not just love, devotion, and surrender. He said there's something even more important than love, devotion, and surrender, and that is obedience. And obedience became the most important thing he was wanting from his disciples. He wrote, "Obedience is of paramount importance. If you obey your master, no matter how imperfect he may be, then the absolute Lord Supreme will be able to illumine you and fulfill you in his own way. Start your spiritual journey with obedience. If you have the inner strength to obey your master, you will be the happiest person." So people used to take on challenges of obedience. Get up every morning, meditate at 6 o'clock, they'd do that. Run a marathon, they'd do that. Swim the English Channel, they'd do that. Whatever he said, people would see it as a real challenge to be obedient to him and to do it. We were all given, this picture here is what was known as a transcendental picture. And this is a picture where he says that in that picture he was absolutely one with the highest supreme. And that's the picture we were to meditate on. But underneath, in this particular thing, he had written, "On Sri Chinmoy's path, the sole fragrance of the complete Guru obedience is indispensable." So every day we were to look at this and to recite this. I'll take this picture down because some people don't like it. So in talking about what was going on in the centre, what was driving the centre, I could talk for days and days about what was driving the centre, but because of time, I've whittled it down to 2 areas. The first one is regarding his personal relationship with someone at the top of the hierarchy, and the second one is about his ambition. So the first one is also a story about the first real crisis that I had as his disciple. This happened a few years after I got my name. I had noticed that in the centre, different cliques were emerging, and some people seemed to know things that other people didn't know. The ones who knew the things, they were the cool crowd, they were the in crowd, and the ones who didn't know, they were the uncool kids. And much to my distress, I was an uncool kid. This woman here is Alo Devi. Sri Chinmoy had a consort. They had met in India, and they had come to New York together, and they had opened a meditation centre. And right from the start, we were told that she was the equal of Sri Chinmoy. She was his equal partner. Everything that he could do, she could do. She had the same powers as him. So sometimes Sri Chinmoy gave people their names. They initiated them, and sometimes Alo did it. And Alo was coming to London, and she was going to give a group of children their name. So it was a very important day for these children. And we all went down to London. We were all waiting for this to happen. So the time came for these children to get their name, and none of the children turned up. And I heard that instead of coming to get their names, they had gone to the cinema with their parents. Now this was unthinkable. The most important day in their life, when they're getting their names, they decide to go to the cinema instead. You know, it didn't make sense. So I was totally confused what it was all about. But that night, my daughter, who was friendly with these children, she said to me, the reason they all went to the cinema was because they don't want their name off Alo. They want their name off Guru. Alo has fallen. She is no longer God-realized. So I was totally shocked by this. Well, Alo's fallen. What's all this about? So I wrote to Sri Chinmoy. I wrote him a letter and I told him what had happened. And I said, is this true? Alo has fallen. You told us that once someone becomes God-realized, they're God-realized for all eternity. They can never fall. And now people are saying Alo has fallen. So a few days later, I got a phone call from his messenger. And the guy said to me, Guru was shocked when he got your letter. So that was the first thing. I had shocked Guru. Oh my God. I was really upset. I had shocked Guru. And then he said, it's not true. Alo has not fallen. So I thought, oh, that's good. But I felt really bad that I had doubted his word, you know. So I thought, okay, Alo's not fallen, so all these people are wrong. So time went on, and I realised that more and more people were buying into this thing, Alo has fallen, and I was kind of standing out there saying, no, she's not. Guru told me that she's not fallen, but still more people were believing that. However, obedience, Guru had told me she hadn't fallen, and I had to be obedient to my Guru, and that was that. Then, a couple of years later, everything happens in years, you know, because I'm covering 27 years here. A few years later, a disciple came from America, and he was going round recruiting new disciples, so he was giving classes and lectures in all the different cities. And he invited me out for dinner. I thought it was to talk about giving classes, which I did. But he didn't talk about classes, he spoke about Alo. And he said to me that one of the purposes he was there was he wanted to, Guru had asked him to tell all the disciples that Alo had fallen. That up till now, certain people believed it, certain people didn't believe it, and you had more status if you didn't believe it than if you did believe it. And Guru wanted an end to all that. All the disciples must know Alo had fallen. So I said, no, she hasn't. He told me she hadn't fallen. But he went on and he told me how she had fallen, and the problem was she was jealous of some of the other girls in the centre and all kinds of things. So eventually I had to take his word. But I was totally devastated by this. I was really devastated, and I was devastated on 3 accounts. The first one is I felt totally humiliated because so many other people knew this secret and I hadn't known it. So among my peers, I just felt totally humiliated. You know, like my status was this, while their status was that. So that was really sore. The next thing is, I was told that I had to be a hypocrite. I was told that whenever Aloe was around, I had to worship her and bow down to her and call her mother, and some people even called her the mother of the universe, and act as though she was the highest thing ever. But all the time I was to know that she had fallen. So I was being instructed now to be a hypocrite. So that was, how did that fit in with leading a spiritual life, following a spiritual life? But the thing that really hurt me most of all and really wrenched me apart was quite clearly Guru had lied to me. He had said to me a few years earlier, he had said to me quite clearly, Aloe has not fallen. And now he was saying even more clearly, Aloe has fallen. Now, if you can't trust your Guru, where are you? You know, this man has said he's going to take you to God realization. But if he's lying to you, where do you stand? Now, you might think, well, why didn't you leave? And the thing is, I had invested so much in this now, following this path. And it's a bit like a battered wife. Sorry for the stereotypes here, if any men are being battered by their wives, but we'll just go with the battered wife syndrome. That often, the first time a wife is battered, she will not leave the husband because she's invested so much in the relationship. And she'll hope that, given time, and he'll change. Or failing that, if she changes, then she won't provoke him and he'll stop battering her. And it's only after she's been battered 5, 6, 7 times that she finally leaves him. And that's quite often what happens in the battered wife syndrome. So it was a bit like that. I had invested so much in this relationship now that I took the second option. I thought, if I change, if I become a better disciple, if I work harder, if I bring more disciples into the group, then Guru won't have to lie to me anymore. He'll realize that he can trust me with the truth. So after being totally devastated for a little while, I came back stronger. And I thought, yes, I'm really going to show him what a good disciple I can be. Now, I'm going to leave Aloe's story there for the time being, and I'm going to pick up on it later on, because it was only after I left the centre that I realised the background to this whole why Aloe had to fall. So the second thing I want to talk about is Sri Chinmoy's ambition, and this drove a lot of the activities in the centre. He had one overriding ambition, and that was he wanted to win a Nobel Prize. Now, he wasn't too fussy which one. He obviously wasn't going to give medicine, even though he had occult powers. And he wasn't going to economics. So it boiled down to either the prize for literature or the prize for peace. Now, I first heard about this. I had heard about this years and years ago. My brother-in-law Tom, who had been at Glasgow University, who was a writer studying literature, he was contacted by a big shot disciple in New York, and he was told to go to his lecturer, who was Edwin Morgan, a famous Scottish poet. He was told to go to his lecturer and ask his lecturer to nominate Sri Chinmoy for the Nobel Prize for Literature. And Tom used to tell the story, and he used to say how embarrassed he was, because Sri Chinmoy, he had written hundreds of books, but they were all self-published, apart from maybe 1 or 2. And the 1 or 2 that were published by mainstream publishers had bombed. No one had bought them, you know. So it's quite hard to get a Nobel Prize for Literature if no one's read your work. And the second thing is he used to write a lot of poems. Sri Chinmoy wrote a lot of poems, and Tom didn't actually like his poetry. It was very kind of flowery, Indian flowery stuff, you know, like that character Raj in The Big Bang Theory, you know, all this kind of stuff. So it was a wee bit like that, you know, it was quite over-the-top flowery stuff. So he was given the task of going to Edwin Morgan, to this great poet, and presenting some of Sri Chinmoy's writing and asking him to nominate him for the Nobel Prize for Literature. I never heard the end of that story, but what happens if someone's nominated for a Nobel Prize, you don't know who has been nominated or who did the nominating for 50 years. So maybe in 10 years' time, I'll be able to check and see if Edwin Morgan did actually nominate Sri Chinmoy for the prize for literature. He didn't get it anyway, that's for sure. But then the spotlight went off the prize for literature, or it may have been going on under the radar that I didn't see, but it moved over to the prize for peace. So this seemed a better chance. Now, to get the Nobel Prize for Peace, you need two things. First of all, you need to do something that impacts the world. And secondly, you have to be nominated. And Sri Chinmoy was failing on both accounts. So he started doing activities to get himself known as a peace ambassador. And the main thing he did, can you hear me over that? The main thing he did was he put on peace concerts. So, as well as fancying himself as a writer and a poet, he also fancied himself as a musician. And he had written hundreds, thousands of songs. And they were all composed on a wee keyboard that size. And he didn't even use the whole keyboard, he just used the black keys. So they kind of ran up and ran down the black keys. You get an odd white key, but basically it was the black keys. And so he had, however, although he wasn't the greatest musician in the world, he thought he was, but he had some of his disciples were excellent musicians, and they would take his songs and they'd sing it as a choir, and they'd make something of it. They'd make it sound good. So at these concerts, the good singers would come out and they'd sing 2 or 3 songs, and then they'd sit down, and for the rest of the night, Sri Chinmoy would be sitting there, and he would play about 20 different instruments, really badly. 2 or 3 of them he was. Sorry, you couldn't make this stuff up. 2 or 3 of them he was passable. He could play the flute a little bit, and he could play the ezraj, which is an Indian instrument. So he'd do a few songs on that, and the rest he'd play all these instruments, and they were dreadful. And he gave hundreds of these concerts in the top concert halls in the world. This is the Albert Hall. He gave several concerts in the Albert Hall, in the Carnegie Hall in New York, in Sydney Opera House, all the great concert halls of the world. He did his things. And you can see, we used to get loads of people, this is the Albert Hall, full. But what happened was, by the intermission, everyone had gone. So the photographers knew to take the picture at the beginning, because if they waited to the end, it would be empty. So a lot of our time, these concerts were offered free to the public, which meant that the disciples paid for them. So, for example, to get the Albert Hall, to hire the Albert Hall, to do all the publicity for the concert, it cost about £80,000. It was a lot of money, and we had to raise that money, and he kept doing them and doing them and doing them. So this was a constant drain on your finances, funding these concerts. So that was a concert thing. The other thing he did was the runs. He got the idea of a relay run around the world. So we had these torches, kind of Olympic-style torches, and we'd hold relays. So that there'd be a British section where maybe for 2 or 3 weeks, runners would run all over Britain through England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales to the big cities. And they'd go into schools, into school assemblies, and the children would hold the torch, the peace torch. It was called the Sri Chinmoy Peace Run. And this happened all over the world, and it's still going on. If you put Sri Chinmoy Peace Run into the internet, into the search engine, you can see all about it and see all the maps of where they all go. So, this is an example. We used to try and get politicians and various people to hold the torch and to run with the torch. This guy, I can't remember his name for the life of me. Can you remember? He's a Scottish MP. So he ran with it. That's a photograph of Sri Chinmoy and then some of the other runners. So this was another thing that went on all the time, was a peace run. So again, this was, through this, he could meet different people, different potential people to nominate him for the peace run. And then we also had different places named after him. So that in Battersea Park, there's a Sri Chinmoy Peace Mile near the pagoda, where there's a mile marked out for runners, a 1 mile loop, and there's a big plaque, I don't know if it's still there, saying the Sri Chinmoy Peace Mile. What they're doing now, even though he's now died, and he's obviously not going to get the Peace Prize now, but they still they still put up statues of him all over the place. So a couple of years ago, one of his statues featured on all the news items on television. Wow. There were floods somewhere in Central Europe, and as the waters rose, the only thing that was left was this statue, half submerged statue of Sri Chinmoy. It was his King Canute moment. Could he halt the waters? No. So these were the kind of things he did in the hope of winning the Nobel Peace Prize. So the second thing was, you have to get people to nominate you. Now, you and I can't nominate anyone for the Nobel Peace Prize. There are certain categories of people who do the nomination. So you have top politicians, members of international courts, top academics, people who have already had the Nobel Peace Prize, organisations that have had the Peace Prize, and plus other people associated by the Peace Prize. So the hunt was on to find people to nominate him, and that became a big thing. Now, fortunately, he had a couple of disciples who were working in the UN, United Nations in New York. So he encouraged a lot of his disciples to get jobs in the United Nations, where they get the chance to meet these people who could nominate him for the prize. So I haven't done that yet. I don't know how many he had, maybe about 50 or so. It varied how many disciples he had. And they got together and they formed a meditation group, the peace meditation at the United Nations. In fact, when I joined the centre, I was told that Sri Chinmoy was the spiritual director of the United Nations.
Wow.
Whatever that is, which wasn't quite true. But this group had formed the peace meditation at the United Nations, and they got him in to lead the meditations twice a week. So now in the publicity, they were able to say he leads twice weekly meditations at the United Nations. And his followers who were working there would try and get delegates to the United Nations to come to their meditations. And then they would meet Sri Chinmoy and they'd be treated extra special. Also, being at the United Nations means there's lots of photographs of him at lecterns with the UN logo on the lectern and different UN symbols behind him. So it looks as if, in the photographs, it looks as if he's actually got some authority to be representing the United Nations, which he hasn't. He's got absolutely no authority at all. But he gives that impression that he has this kind of authority. So that was one way he met potential people to nominate him for the Peace Prize. Another way was he invented these sham awards. Now, you're the Atheist Society. If you want Richard Dawkins to come and talk to you, what you have to do is you have to come up with an award. Say the Universal Students Atheist Prize to Leading Lights of Atheism, and say that you want to award it to him, you know, and then he comes and you can award it to him and get him to talk. So basically this is what we're doing. Sri Chinmoy came up with the U Tant Peace Prize. Now U Tant was the second Secretary General of the United Nations. It was during the 60s. He was leading the United Nations, and by chance some of his disciples had rented property in Connecticut, and U Tant happened to be their neighbour. So they managed to get a meeting with Yutant, and they invited him to come and see a play that Sri Chinmoy had written about Buddha. So he came to the play, and they got the photographs, Yutant and Sri Chinmoy, they got the photographs, which meant that they could use that photograph to increase his legitimacy and to get other people to come and meet him. So after Yutant had died, Sri Chinmoy came up with the Yutant Peace Prize, I think it was called, the Yutant Award. And the really big shots, they'd arranged meetings by awarding them this prize, the Yutant Prize. So I can't remember exactly who they got, but it would be people like Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa and different people like that, top people, often who had already received the Nobel Peace Prize, because remember, people who had already received the Nobel Peace Prize could nominate. So they would award them the Yutant Award. And then there was another award that was more common. This was the Lifting Up the World with the Oneness Heart Award. Nice snappy title there. He was into a lot of different sports, particularly weightlifting. And he had this contraption built where there's a platform up here, and people would climb stairs onto the platform, and he would stand underneath and he'd lift them. a foot or so, they'd be lifted into the air. And so they got a lot of celebrities and a lot of academics and politicians, all kinds of people came to, this is his tennis court where we used to meet. And they'd climb onto this contraption and he'd lift them. And while they were being lifted, there'd be a choir of lovely young girls singing, "Lifting up the world with a oneness heart, the hour of God and its victory start." And then they'd get a medal, a Lifting Up the World with a Oneness Heart medal. And if they were very special, he'd even write a song for them. And the song would have lines like, "Your greatness mind, your goodness heart," blah, 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 blah. So this was going on all the time. The singers were singing these songs to all these celebrities. So that was fine. Now, a big coup that they got in London was a friend of mine. She managed to arrange a meeting between Princess Diana and Sri Chinmoy. This was a few months before Diana died, and she was big news. So after she died, Sri Chinmoy wrote a book in her honour. And he's such a narcissist. In it, he put all their pictures and he put all their correspondence in this book, copies of all their correspondence. And I just want to show you the letters he wrote to her. So you can see in the letter he wrote to her, the notepaper he's used, Sri Chinmoy, Peace Meditation at the United Nations. He's immediately saying he's associated with the United Nations. Got a picture here of himself and Yutant together, and he's got the UN emblem here. So it looks like this is it here. There's pages and pages of these letters that he wrote to her. Now there is a thing down here that says that this is an association of staff and delegates and NGOs who meditate twice weekly at the United Nations. So it doesn't explicitly say I am the leader of the peace, or I'm authorised to use these symbols or anything like that. But the implicit message is that he has some authority at the United Nations, and he has no authority at all. But if you're wanting to get in touch with Princess Diana, well, obviously you have to put on a good show, don't you? So this is just some of the things he was doing to meet top people. I don't think Diana was able to nominate. I don't think she would have been in that category. However, she had contacts, and she had, well, he probably just liked her. She was dead famous, you know, so he probably just liked the association. I know Princess Diana. And I had a friend in London who sadly has just passed away now, but she had arranged the meeting with Diana, and she was very good at arranging these top meetings. And I remember her once saying to me that she arranged the meetings And she cultivated the relationship and she worked so hard to get this going. But after it came to a certain stage, she would be told not to contact that person anymore and someone else was going to take over. And she wasn't allowed to contact that person again. So I don't know what this other person was doing, but I do wonder if this other person was the one who would then try and get the nomination out of the person who they had cultivated the relationship with. So how many people actually nominated Sri Chinmoy? I have no idea, and we won't know until 50 years have passed since they were nominated. He thought that he had been nominated by many, many people, and the disciples thought he had been nominated by many, many people. And often on the week before the nomination was due, everything in New York would be spruced up and would be expecting all the press to come when the announcement was made. And of course, year after year, he didn't get it, and he'd go in a bad mood for a day or two. But he certainly thought, and it's quite possible people, just to get a bit of peace, would say, I'm going to nominate him. But obviously he wasn't nominated. So now I'm going to move on to how I left. So by the time I had been there for 27 years, I mean, there was a lot of good stuff. I was having a lot of nice meditations all through that time, and there were a lot of good things happening. But at the same time, everything was becoming very robotic. Like, every so often he'd say, right, I've written a new song, you have to sing it every day for the rest of your life. I've got a special message for you, and you have to say this, recite this every day for the rest of your life. So before I left, we bought this book, and it's got all the things you had to do every day. So as well as meditating for half an hour, which is not in this, and running, which again is not in this, you had all these songs to sing every day, and a whole lot of recitations to make every day. And then you were also supposed to do what they called selfless service. That means work for nothing, in promoting the group in some way. So by the time you went through that, I mean, this took hours and hours and hours to do every day. And I think most people didn't do them all, but they made a good attempt. So it was all that was one thing, it was all very robotic. The other thing is it had become terribly controlling. We got to the stage where he was saying, if you see your brother or sister disciple doing something wrong, you have to let me know. And the pretense was that he would be able to intervene and save that person. But really it was like keeping tabs on everyone and spying on everyone. And some people, especially the newer disciples who never really knew him on a personal level at all, they would think they would get brownie points by reporting an older disciple. Because they thought, oh, Sri Chinmoy will notice me, he'll realise I'm a good disciple, I'm being obedient, I'm reporting all these bad things that other people are doing. Silly wee things, like, you should get up 6 o'clock to meditate this morning. So anyway, it was becoming more and more controlling and kind of stifling. I felt I wasn't making any progress. But the clincher was, I felt it's not going to change, Again, cliques had emerged. After the aloe story, where he had lied to me, I just kept my mouth shut. I didn't ask questions. I just observed. And it was quite clear to me that there were a group of girls who appeared to be on an advanced course because they seemed to know something that I didn't know. And I didn't know what this was. I kind of speculated and say, are they getting extra meditation classes, that the rest of us aren't getting? And are they being told extra secrets that the rest of us aren't being told? But I kept my mouth shut because often you learn more by keeping your mouth shut than you did by opening it and showing your ignorance. But anyway, I had decided to leave. I had been thinking of leaving for years, and I decided to leave because I didn't see how the situation was going to change, and I was becoming more and more unhappy. So I had to plan how I was going to leave. Although, I could just have walked out, but I wanted to kind of arrange it so I could say goodbye to certain people. Now, there was a trip to Cambodia and Vietnam one Christmas, And I had arranged to go on the Cambodian section of it, and then the group were moving on to Vietnam. So I decided that I'd go to the Cambodia trip, and then when I came home, I would leave a message for Sri Chinmoy saying I've left. That I haven't turned against him or anything, but I just want to leave. So that was the plan. And while I was in Cambodia, knowing that I was going to leave, I heard a rumour. I heard a rumour that a girl who had left a year or two before had written a story on the internet, and this story was dynamite. So I kept my mouth shut. I thought, as soon as I get home, I'm going to find that story and find out what is going on here, you know. So when I left, I told Sri Chinmoy I had left, and I went on the internet. I was on the internet solidly for 4 weeks, reading stories. There was a website that opened up where ex-disciples were talking. And there were about 300-400 messages on this site, and I read every single one of them, and it filled a lot of gaps for me. So I'll just talk about what I found there. First of all, when you leave, I knew that when I left, I had 1,000 friends in the centre. I knew that when I left, I would suddenly have 1,000 enemies. I would lose all my friends, I'd lose all my life, I'd have to start from scratch again. I was already over 50 years old, and I knew that I was going to have to start building my life again. There's one thing, I'll just tell you another reason why I wanted to leave, was he was becoming more and more narcissistic. I want to show you the words of a song he wrote. This song, it was actually written in Bengali, but he gave us a translation. And the song is addressed to the Supreme, to the Highest, and this is the words of it. I wanted to become just a poet, but you have made me a seer poet. I wanted to become a yogi, but you have made me an avatar as a divine incarnation. I wanted to be your lamb, but you have made me your lion king. I desired the dust of your feet, but you gave me your victory garland, your crown and your throne. So there he was, seated on the throne of God, wearing God's crown. So it became very hard to kind of justify all this self-adulation that was going on. So anyway, when I read the website, there were 3 messages on it, 3 girls who claimed to have been part of a wider sex group in the centre. So Sri Chinmoy had always said that he was celibate, and that to be God realised you need to be celibate. Suddenly here were 3 people I knew who were telling a story. And that some of the things they were saying in the story, I knew that this wasn't made up, because they were saying certain things that I didn't know about the sex thing, but I knew certain other things, and they weren't widely known, and they were talking about them as well. So I knew these stories were true. The first one, she was the centre leader in a big centre in America, and she had a 10-year affair with Sri Chinmoy. Whenever she came to New York, he would call her to his house for sex, and if he was travelling in her part of the world, he would call her again for sex. The second one was a New York girl, and she had also had a 10-year affair with him, but in her story, there's something very strange come up, and she said that after a few years of when they had sex now and again, that he changed it, and he wanted her to have sexual relationships with a woman in front of him while he watched. And I wasn't quite sure if I believed that. That sounded quite fantastic. And then there was a third person who told her story. Again, I knew who this person was, and she never had straight sex with him. She was initiated into this kind of girl with girl in front of him thing, and she left after being kind of brought into this. She left a few weeks later, or very shortly afterwards. So that was one of the things. This whole kind of sex circle that was operating in the centre, that if you weren't in it, you didn't know about it. I wasn't in it. Obviously, it didn't fancy me, but never mind. Must be thankful for small blessings. If anyone found out about the sex circle, they were kicked out of the centre, because he had to control the information. He didn't want things spread. So if someone told you about it and you mentioned it and he heard that, you would be out of the centre, and people would be told another story. They'd say you had a girlfriend or some boyfriend or something like that, and you'd be kicked out in order to control information. Once you were out, no one would speak to you again. You know, your reputation would be trashed, and no disciple would have anything to do with you. The girl who was the leader of the big centre in America, who told her story, she said that twice she became pregnant to Sri Chinmoy, and both times she was told to have an abortion, which she did. The second girl, she said that he said to her, if you get pregnant, just have an abortion, don't even tell me about it. So things have moved on. So he never used any protection or anything like that. You know, these girls, he was demanding sex, and if they got pregnant, they were to abort it. But there were also other stories of abortion that even people who were married, disciples who were married, if they had a kid, because of the kind of the celibacy rule in the centre, you weren't supposed to have children. So if someone got pregnant, even to their husband, they'd be told quietly to have an abortion. It wasn't generally known. I had already known about 2 people in Britain who were told to have abortions, but I thought they were... I was quite disturbed when I heard it, but I thought they were kind of exceptions, but it seems this was quite widespread, but never spoken about. And then there were people who had affairs with someone outside the centre. They would also be told to have an abortion. So there was a lot of abortion going on. I also found out about the legal status of the centre. I had been told when I had joined, I was told it's not a religion, it's a spiritual path. And I used to give classes, I used to recruit people, and I would always say to them, we're not a religion, we're a spiritual path. Well, it seems that it had registered as a religion really early on, in either the 60s or the early 70s. It had become a religion, and it was registered with the Charity Commission and things. And they had to, they were supposed to, because they had this registration, they were supposed to hold votes for a committee every year. There were never any votes when I was there. And they were supposed to have accounts available every year. Well, there were never any accounts. In fact, all the money was handed over in cash. You know, he'd sell his books and everyone would pay by cash. He'd sell his tapes, everything would be paid for in cash. So there was no paper trail for any of the finance at all. So all these things were coming out in these posts that the ex-disciples were putting on the internet. So now it became clear why Aloe had to fall. I mean, Aloe, people were calling her the mother of the universe. You know, Sri Chinmoy was a god and she was the mother of the universe. Now, if the mother of the universe's partner wants you to have sex with him, you can see cheating on the mother of the universe might cause a bit of cognitive dissonance. You know, that it could create difficulties for him. So Aloe had to fall so that these girls would have sex with him, basically. However, she must never know she had fallen, because she knew too much. She had known him in India. She had come with him to New York. And if she thought that she was being demoted in this way, she could spill the beans and the whole thing could come crashing down. So that's why this duplicity was going on, that everyone had to know she had fallen, but no one was allowed to say it to her face. They all had to pretend to her face that she hadn't fallen. So originally, the Aloe has fallen message was just on a need-to-know basis. Basically, if he wanted to have sex with you, you needed to know she had fallen. But then the gossip mill grew and more people knew, and it was causing all kinds of problems. And that's why he decided in the end that everyone must know that Aloe had fallen. But there was one group of girls who still remained loyal to Aloe, and they still believed that she was this great soul. And Sri Chinmoy did something really quite horrible. He created a club, and he called it the Impurity Club. And these girls who were still faithful to Aloe were put in the Impurity Club. And they didn't know why they were there. You know, they thought, oh, I've got an impure mind, I've got impure habits, I've got all kinds of things. It was nothing to do with their mind or anything like that. It was just because they were loyal to Aloe. He didn't want anyone else talking to them. So they had become kind of untouchables in the centre. Absolutely shocking. So the whole owl thing cost a fortune because she had to be kept out of New York. She had 2 helpers and they travelled around the world staying in 5-star hotels. So that's 3 people travelling all around the world, and we were all having to pay for it to keep them on the road. And it was supposed to be because they were setting up trips and things like that, but really it was to keep her out of the way so she, Chinmoy, could have the sex life he wanted. Okay, I'm going to kind of just finish off now. 2 people have written books about their time in the centre. First one is Deborah Santana, who Carlos Santana's wife. They're now divorced, but they were married in the centre. This is actually a book about her life, but a large section of it, about half of it, is given over to her time in the centre. And she talks about various things, and including that she became pregnant to Carlos Santana while she was a disciple, and she was told by Sri Chinmoy to have an abortion. The second book that I'll mention is Cartwheels in a Sari, and this is written by a girl called Jayanti Tam. Her parents had become disciples in the late 60s, and the girl got pregnant, and she's the one case where she wasn't told to have an abortion, she was allowed to have the baby. And Sri Chinmoy told the disciples that this was a very special soul that had been sent down, and this is blah, 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 blah. So she had very high status in the centre, and she was very inner circle. But then when she got to being a teenager, she wanted to do the things that other teenagers did. She wanted to have boyfriends and this kind of thing. So eventually she left, and she wrote a book about her time in the centre. So that's a kind of an insider's view of it. On the 11th of October 2007, Sri Chinmoy had a heart attack and he died. The next day, the Nobel Peace Prize for 2007 was announced. And it was given to Al Gore and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Sri Chinmoy thought he was getting it. So that is the story of my 27 years in the Hindu cult.